Good afternoon, or good morning, I should say, to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's cold, real cool, I should say, dreary day on campus. We're expecting rain showers, but yesterday was sunny and got into the 80s. You couldn't believe campus. Students were all over the quads, throwing frisbees, playing games, blaring music, laying out in the sun. It was the campus really came to life for the first 80-degree weather day here on campus. And of course, in only South Bend fashion, we've dipped to rain and being cool the very next day. But we're grateful. We're going to hang on to that 80-degree sunny day for a long time going forward. A quick COVID update. Really pleased to share with all of you that yesterday, out of thousands of surveillance tests on campus, we had a total of 3 positive cases. And the day before, we had a total of 0 positive cases. And on Sunday, we had 1 positive case. So the 7-day trailing positivity rate is 0.2%, which is the lowest that we've experienced all year. That's the miracle of the vaccine. And as you know, over 90% of our students have received the first vaccine on campus. And given that we administered the Pfizer vaccine, we begin tomorrow. It's the 3-week point from those who received the vaccine on the very first day. They will receive their second dose, and we will go through next Thursday of next week, and we will have over 90% of our student population fully vaccinated, for which we are enormously grateful and really so overwhelmed with gratitude for our students stepping up. Many of them fear of the vaccine or concerns, but they stepped up to get it done for each other. And I think it's a great model, a great lesson for the rest of us in this country. I also want to let you know, many of you have watched the interview that we did a few weeks ago with Commander Mike Hopkins, who was on the space station, and he came to us live via satellite through NASA. And he's a Notre Dame parent. We had a wonderful conversation. And he and his crew are about to splash down today at 12:40 Eastern Standard Time into the Atlantic Ocean. So our prayers are with Mike and the crew as they re-enter our atmosphere and return to Earth. And so I'm sure if you get a chance, you can watch the news today at 12:40. Today, I am really excited to interview somebody who is professional in this field. So he's going to be able to point out all of my faults in lavender. But I'm okay with that because I have no aspirations to follow in his footsteps. And I was talking to my wife this morning, who's a Notre Dame grad, but from Brazil, still really doesn't understand the rules of football. And I was telling her that the person that I'm going to interview today is a 4-year starter on the Notre Dame football team. He's a Super Bowl champion, and yet those 2 facts are probably what is least interesting about him, certainly to her. But I said, this man is as good to the core as you will meet. I am so excited. He's also, and you'll hear more through some of the questions about some of his accolades of late, but he is also the game analyst for Notre Dame Football Radio Network. So we are pleased today to welcome Ryan Harris. And thanks so much for being with us, Ryan. Let's go back to your childhood growing up in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I've always, had a bias for St. Paul over Minneapolis. I don't know if it's just because it's named after St. Paul, but I know it's the smaller of the two. So I'm proud that you're from St. Paul, and I know much of your family's still there. But tell us a little bit about your growing up experience, a little bit about your parents and your siblings, and what it was like growing up in the Harris household.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Lou. It's amazing to get some one-on-one time with you like this. It's always fun to talk with you, and you're so busy and you've done so much for Notre Dame. So thanks for having me. And Notre Dame, I mean, growing up in St. Paul, capital city of Minnesota, we often have to remind people, it's a tight-knit group. It's called the biggest small town in America back home, and I just grew up around family. I grew up hearing, church bells of the Catholic Church nearby. There's the archdiocese there. There's a cathedral there. Growing up in St. Paul, it's a railroad town, so you're encouraged to roll up your sleeves. I mean, James J. Hill was one of the big, money makers in that town, so to speak. But this attitude of roll up your sleeves and get it done is something that was instilled in me early. First with a snow shovel, right? Because you're going to have to shovel a lot in St. Paul and frequently. But it's an amazing place. You go through tons of changes of weather, but that's really where I laid down my tracks for success. I mean, literally running up, storied hills and stairs on Summit Avenue, one of the main thoroughways there to train for being a collegiate athlete. My family taught me, the family values that I continue to this day with my family. And it was just an amazing place to grow up. With a lot of options in terms of education too. I mean, a lot of people don't know St. Paul is one of the most highly educated cities in our nation. We've got Hamline University, St. Thomas University, some of University of Minnesota. So it was fun for me to be around, education, roll up your sleeves and get the work done, and also surrounded so closely by family.
Well, I think an important question that follows is, do you skate well? Can you play
Yeah,
hockey? I mean,
I was born with skates.
the only former offensive lineman, huge offensive lineman in the NFL that is a really good hockey player.
I was great at hockey. You get born with skates in Minnesota,
Yeah,
and living here in Denver. One of the first things I recognized when I got drafted here, I said, "Where's all the ice rinks? Where are the ice rinks at the parks?" Because
right.
every single park in Minnesota, they flood the ice in winter. But I'll tell you, hockey is an economically prohibitive sport. I still remember being 12 years old, going to hockey signups at the local, rec center. And I benefited from a program by Steve Mariucci. He started Mariucci Intercity Hockey in the Twin Cities. And so I got free ice time, free gear. I played every position. And then we went to a suburb where we moved. And I remember still to this day, we went to sign up and the woman said, "Great, that'll be $1,800. And this is in like 1995. And my mom turned to me and looked at me and goes, "You're done playing hockey." And we left. And that was it. That was the last part of me playing hockey. So I love getting my kids on the skates. And I think that's a great tool for, development. And in Minnesota, if you don't play hockey, you must be a really, really great fisherman.
That's fantastic. So when did you take up football in your youth and all the different sporting activities you were engaged in? When did you know that football was something you were really passionate about?
Well, I loved football because my grandfather had season tickets to the Minnesota Vikings. So I got to go probably once or twice a year. And his tickets were right in front of where the linemen warmed up, So I'd make sure we got there early and hear these big guys. I mean, Lou, I was a big kid back in the day. I had, my cheeks were coming out of my glasses, chubby guy. And so, but it was like, oh, there's these big guys that can play. And but because my family just didn't want me to get started too early, I didn't start playing until I was 14. And that's something I'm really, really grateful for. I saw a lot of players in college and in the pros who were just burnt out. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes today parents make, is trying to specialize their kids so young. Roger Federer didn't start playing tennis until he was 14.
Wow.
But I'll never forget my first practice. I didn't even know how to hit. We got our pads on. A cornerback came down with an interception. I just closed my eyes and leapt at him. And turns out I knew how to hit, and I did know how to listen. And that was one of the big things for me in the beginning of my career and throughout my career, is I was willing to listen. And I'll never forget, after the first practice, my coach brought us all up and he was talking, and he turned to me in front of everybody. He said, "And Ryan, if you keep this up, you can be something really special." And so in that way, football loved me first. And I was enamored, and I wanted to maximize the time I could spend playing football and maximize the places it could take me.
Yeah. And now you and Jamie are raising three young children. that a boy, girl, and a boy.
Mhm.
And what is your philosophy then on sports? Because we see so many crazy stories about parents overhyping their kids at very young ages. And tell us what, given your own experience and now raising children, how do you look at being a parent of children playing different sports?
Our kids got to have fun, whatever they're doing. It's up to them. And, it's always funny for me when I go to, sporting events for my kids, I can always tell, the parents that didn't play, because they're the loudest ones cheering for just their kid, right? Like, hey,
Yeah,
that's one of the things I tell on my radio show. Say, hey, if you're a parent at your kid's event, cheer for some of the other players too, But I know, and every athlete knows, and every athlete talks about this. We talk about this in circles, and we talk about this. But what parents who have not played at high levels don't understand is your kid has to want it at a different level. No one was stopping me from playing football until my body gave out or I was not talented enough. And what parents don't know is it doesn't matter how much training you put your kid through, doesn't matter how many camps they go to. At some point, they're going to go against a player like me. And when
yeah,
they don't have it deep down, I'm going to eat their lunch all day, all day through church on Sunday.
yeah,
And that's a moment that, in my opinion, parents need to prepare kids for failure.
yeah,
And instead of just the success and the photographs of just your kids, make sure your kids are having fun. I one of my teammates in high school was Joe Mauer. Could be a Hall of Fame baseball player. And
right.
I asked him, he played basketball, baseball, and football. Got a scholarship to Florida State.
Hmm.
And I said, hey, if you'd have had to been specialized, what would you have played? He said, if I had to choose early, I would have chosen basketball. I mean,
Hmm.
think about that. Here's a Hall of Fame baseball player,
Right.
that would have been playing basketball if he had to choose. And I tell parents all the time, I had a neighbor come over. Her son's got into an elite 11-year-olds hockey league. I don't even know what that means, Lou. And I said, listen, nobody remembers how many championships Tom Brady won at 9 or
Yeah,
11 or
yeah,
13.
yeah,
You have a longer timeline if it's real. And if it's not real, you want your kid to be experiencing other things early. You want your kid to be the worst player on a team. You want your kid to learn how to overcome adversity. And those are the things that we want our kids to learn in my family early. And they want to have fun and, hey, overcome failure, because those are lessons for life.
yeah. I remember with our fourth child, and it was in an AAU basketball league, and that can be pretty crazy at times. And in the fifth grade, and at one point, they were getting beat by a team, and the coach started screaming at them in the huddle, and he said, "If any one of you is here not to get a Division I college basketball scholarship, you have no business on this team." And I was sitting right behind the huddle, and I thought I was going to raise my hand. My kid's not here to get a Division I. He's here to learn about competition and collaboration and how to deal with victory with grace and defeat
Yeah.
with courage. And I do think there's so many life lessons that you can get if you keep things in perspective from youth sports. Now, you mentioned something early on. You talked about St. Paul, and you talked about the Catholic Church bells and everything, and then you went to Cretan Durham. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it
Yeah.
correct,
Yeah.
but a feeder school for a great Catholic school in the Twin City area that has sent many football players, student athletes, and students to Notre Dame over the years. And then you choose Notre Dame, but you are a devout Muslim.
Mm.
And I know that there were many stories done at the time. Is why would this devout Muslim choose Catholic education, both for high school and for college? Can you give us a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, early on in the process of choosing a college, Notre Dame was the only school that brought me to a mosque. I mean, think about that.
Hmm.
Not USC, not Michigan, who has Muslim staff and instructors and a large Muslim population. Miami didn't bring me to a mosque. Stanford wasn't planning to bring me to a mosque. But I'll never forget, before we even got to the hotel, Notre Dame brought me by the local mosque there. Not only that, there was at the time a women's basketball coach who was Muslim, and she met me there, and I was just overwhelmed with, we all know when we've been listened to, and we all know when we've been respected, and Notre Dame started that way with me, and I thought that was so profound, and it was something that really changed my life, and it opened me up to an idea, that I would be welcome in a community of faith. And it gave me a different perspective on my visit. you know, here's the largest Catholic institution of the world really practicing agape love. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And also not being apologetic about that. And that's something I value tremendously in my relationships today. You know, I've got great friends who are Catholic, Christian, Jewish, you know, Muslim, but to be able to walk with your faith as a known piece of who you are is something that I really wanted to develop. And in that way, I became a better Muslim at Notre Dame because I was around people who understood not only the acts of faith, but the works of faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just to be able to be around people who, when I said, hey, I'm praying, or hey, it's Ramadan, you know, they weren't trying to pass me a beer funnel or something like that. You know, it was a group that understood faith. And one of the things I took away from Cretin-Derham Hall and Notre Dame is service. You know, service was real to the people who I knew who were deeply, you know, connected to their faith. And because of that service, I went on in high school, I went on a Border Links trip to learn about the border, which I learned a whole lot, including really cemented my Spanish. And then I also went on a civil rights trip here in America. I've been to Selma, and it was all because, you know, fathers at my school and teachers cared enough to give these service experiences. And I'll never forget that first year at Notre Dame. You know, I was talking to one of my guys in Siegfried Hall of Champions. I said, hey, what are you doing for spring break? He goes, well, I'm going on a service trip. I thought, man, there are not a lot of universities in this country that people are going on spring break on a service trip. So between walking with faith, listening and respecting, and really showing that agape love, I really learned a lot from Notre Dame, and I became a better Muslim. I was encouraged to go deeper into my studies and my faith, but also how I can bring that to my everyday life.
Got it. Wow, it's amazing that at such a young age that you would have that depth of perspective, and that you. I also heard that you have a deep appreciation for Notre Dame because of its devotion to Our Lady, the
Yeah.
Mother of God, and in the Catholic, in the Christian tradition. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I've grown increasingly in love, and I loved it right when I came, you know, because I didn't know much about Notre Dame when I was being recruited, and so I said, you know, what's Notre Dame mean? And the coach told me, our mother. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, wow, you know, what powerful words. You know, not my mother, not, you know, our Christian mother, not our, you know, Muslim mother, but our mother. And a lot of people don't know, you know, Muslims believe in Immaculate Conception as well. And
Yep.
Mary, Mother of Jesus, is referred to in the Quran throughout the Quran. So there was just this constant in your name, in the name of the university,
Yeah.
our mother. And I think that, and that has been something that I've really used in my life from my perspective from faith or even issues, right? If a member of our family is having an issue, how would our mother treat it? Not, you know, my mom, I'm going to go home to mom and see what she says, how I should act, like our mother. So this very encompassing title of our university and just, you know, reverence of, you know, Mary, Mother of Jesus. And it was just something that I carry with me. You know, how does our mother look at social justice? How does our mother, you know, look at poverty, and what excuse would our mother accept? And if, you know, our mother's anything like my mother, not a lot of room for excuses when the tracks are laid out there for you.
Yeah. No, that's amazing, and I think in some ways, you know, it's. I remember when you were a student here, and we've known each other since. And I think you represent the Catholic values of this place as well as any student athlete I've ever met, and you do that through your Muslim tradition. You are in the midst of Ramadan right now, and I tell everyone, and I don't think anybody. I've done a lot of fasting over time in my life, and I'm just stand in awe at the practice of fasting and prayer that is month long every year for the billions of Muslims throughout the world. Could you give us a little insight into this? And especially, I want to look back and ask you about the times that you were in spring training here on campus in particular, and you're doing your Ramadan fast, but you're playing in the blue gold game and working out every day and not having an excuse whatsoever. So tell us a little bit about Ramadan in general and then your experience with it.
Yeah, you know, and this is another way in which Notre Dame gave me language to use, right? Ramadan's a lot like Lent, you know, in that you're encouraged to return to your priorities for an entire month. And And in Islam, that means, you don't eat or drink any fluids or food during the daylight hours. And so when I first became Muslim at 14, it was in the winter months. So it wasn't that hard to eat breakfast before 7:30, right? And to get dinner then at 4:45. But now this morning, today I was up by 4:15 and you had to eat by 4:41, and I'll be eating at 7:51 tonight. So it was one of those deals where you really are encouraged to read the Quran. It's told that the Quran was passed down through the month of Ramadan. So you're encouraged to read the religious text. You're encouraged to repair any relationships you can, reconnect with family. And, one of the biggest things that fasting, I think, teaches all of us is even on our worst day when we're fasting, things are pretty good still, and to be able to reach for food or to be able to snag a Snicker bar when you're getting gas. I mean, that's a real blessing.
Yeah.
And, with all of our success, it's easy to forget how blessed we really are.
Yeah.
And I know you worked with the poor for 8 years and beyond, and you had that everyday experience of, man, I'm really lucky to drive a car, to have a healthy family, to have someone who loves me, to not have addiction, these kinds of things. And in that way, Ramadan really just brings you back down to earth. It really encourages you to give in charity, and it's an amazing month. And it's something where, while I played at Notre Dame and in the NFL, they say don't ever miss on God's mercy, because God's being, gracious and giving you mercy. So if you have a hardship, whether you're pregnant, nursing, fasting, old age, have any kind of illness, you can forego your fast and donate food or feed a homeless person. So in that way, while I played football and days I couldn't fast, I really worked to, connect with places that helped me serve, so I would serve the poor. And here in Denver, got connected with the Denver Rescue Mission, and the Catholic charities out here, and able to just see how lucky we are. And Ramadan is just a purifying month that brings you to your priorities.
Well, let me be really clear that our prayers are with you in solidarity for the final couple of weeks here of Ramadan, and for the Muslims everywhere that are really participating in this sacred season and trying to go back to the fundamentals of their faith. So, thank you for your example, and which again inspires us, I think, to pursue our own faith traditions in meaningful and significant ways. So you're a master of all kinds of anecdotes and stories, and I want to get to them. And I want to begin with one that comes from your high school experience. My understanding is you were approached by a producer from MTV. And back in the day, MTV was a big deal. So can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah. I was when you're in high school and you're being recruited, your coach comes by and says, "Hey, Notre Dame called. They want you to call them back. Michigan called. They want you to call them back." So one day my coach comes in and says, "Hey, no, MTV called. They want you to call them back." I thought, wow, this is back in the day, like you said, Lou, where, people watched MTV, Total Request Live. And so I thought, man, maybe like they're doing, top 100 high school players. Who knows? They even had MTV Sports back then, And so I called this number back, and the guy's name is Pat Lope. He said, "Hey, I'm Pat Lope. I'm a big Notre Dame fan. I'm a producer for this show called True Life. Have you heard about it?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, hey, I see you got to gain weight to be successful at Notre Dame. I wanted to know if we could come film some of that process over a couple of days in the summer." And I was like, "Sure." And he's like, "All right, well, I'll call you back and we'll set up some dates." And we hung up. It was like the shortest conversation I ever had. And I got back, and my buddy in school was like, "Hey, what was that about?" I was like, "I think I'm going to be on True Life." So they came and they recorded a couple, just like literally 2 days, Lou. They filmed me working out. And I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think anybody would see it. And sure enough, it aired. And then the very next day, I left for my first day at Notre Dame. And many of us that from Notre Dame know when you land in Chicago and you got to go under the causeway to get to the South Bend flight. So I'm going down the escalator, and I'm got my bags. I'm by myself, young man on the road to his freedom, to his journey. And as I'm going down, this lady's coming up the escalator, and she goes, "You were on MTV last night." And I was like, "Oh my God, people saw it." I'm like, "Oh my God." So now I'm just sweating bullets on the plane, because I know if anybody on the team saw it, I'm in a big pile. And sure enough, as soon as I got there, they were like, "Where's that MTV kid?" And it started early for me at Notre Dame. But then, when other students got to campus, they're like, hey, where's that MTV kid? Like, oh, let me show you my friend Ryan. Like, oh, we're friends now, right? So it taught me early on that people will recognize you before you recognize them. And as an athlete, that is an incredibly important lesson to learn. And I learned it my first day.
So you're in a fishbowl as a student athlete, right? And
Yeah.
you got the experience even before that with MTV, but how your actions are going to be magnified and going to have a big impact either for the positive or negative, depending on how you behave. So you're right. That's a really important lesson. Well, you were one of the most hotly recruited uh, um, football players in high school in the country. How did that process go, and what did it come down to, and how did you choose Notre Dame, and why?
You know, it for me, I always wanted to compete on the field and in the classroom, and different universities gave me one or the other, right? Miami had just won a national championship, and I'll never forget sitting in Larry Coker's office, and he said, "Hey, Ryan, we just won our championship. We need you to win another." And we toured the facilities for education, and there was literally dust on remember the old D-Disc Microsoft or
Yeah.
Apple computers? There's
Yes.
dust. I was like, no one's been in this room for a year and a half.
Right.
USC couldn't find a player, a single instructor from its political science program to meet with me, so they were out. But for me, it came down to a couple of the experiences I had at Notre Dame, and one of them was, I was there for the Michigan Notre Dame game, and Notre Dame beat Michigan. Everybody storming the field, and I'm on the field as a 17-year-old with my eyes wide open. And someone to this day, I don't know who he was, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I know who you are. I know why you're here. You come to Notre Dame. You're more than a number. You're a part of the family." And that was one experience. I was like, "Oh my gosh, like what?" And he just left. He didn't want anything. Didn't want an autograph, And then in deciding to go to Notre Dame, I knew that I would compete both in the classroom and on the field. I wanted that challenge, and that's something I think is unique about all of us that go to Notre Dame. We seek the challenge. Every Notre Dame football player, every Notre Dame athlete, every Notre Dame student, it would have been easy to go anywhere else and do just one thing, but we seek that challenge. And then immediately after, committing to Notre Dame, I had somebody who had a daughter at my high school, and he stuck out his hand and said, "Hey, real quick, just want to introduce myself. My name is Mike Doherty, Notre Dame graduate. Welcome to the family." And it was just this moment of instantly after committing to Notre Dame, I was a part of a family that was successful, that had the expectation of success and also the expectation to work for that success. And that's something that I deeply, deeply value to this day.
That's fantastic. Tell us a little bit about your non-football experience at Notre Dame. You already mentioned Siegfried Hall, the Hall of Champions, and it is a great hall. I lived in Soren. Soren is a college. The others are just dorms, but it's one of the Siegfried's one of the best among the dorms. So what did you major in, and what were some of the other extracurricular engagements that you had, which had to be limited given the demands of the football program? But tell us about the non-football experience for you at Notre Dame.
Yeah, well, I double majored in political science and economics and policy. Had some amazing classes. Graduated 3.5 years, which I was just so thankful to be able to do summer school and things like that. But I'll never forget when I first came to Notre Dame and those old pep rallies, Lou. And Coach Willingham was there when I was being recruited, and the players speaking would talk about their dorm, and the dorm goes crazy, and I also will never forget that, Notre Dame, and they'd mentioned it in recruiting, but I didn't really think about it. They said, "Hey, you're going to room with somebody who's not an athlete." And I'm so thankful for that experience. And my first college roommate, he literally said to me when I walked in the door, he says, "Hey man, welcome to Notre Dame. I got to be honest, you're the first Black person I've ever met. So, forgive me if I ask you any questions that, are rude." And I thought, wow, what a powerful experience for him, to have grown up. He grew up outside of Chicago, hadn't really known a Black person. Now you're living with one,
Right.
as much as it is for me to live with a student, for someone to live with someone of a different skin color, that's a new experience, right? Those who watch the MTV, they remember the real world.
That's right.
But I also, some of my deepest friendships to this day came from Notre Dame and staying in Siegfried Hall. Al Farello and James Fitzgerald are two buddies of mine, and James Fitzgerald's a tech executive in Silicon Valley, and it's funny because here we are, we grew up together. I'd crash their quad and we'd have sodas and popcorn and watch the Masters and stuff. And then when I went to Super Bowl 50 in Santa Clara, Fitzy came out there and we're talking, and he's leaving. He turns around and goes, "Rye guy, you're in the bleeping Super Bowl, man. Isn't this crazy?" So there's these just relationships that opened up my curiosity. I'm curious because of tech. I'm curious of tech because of the people I lived with. I'm curious about and know how to ask questions about where people live because I lived with people from all over. And I had to learn how to speak to people who didn't just play football. And that's something that really prepared me for life. Brendan Kruger and Dave Brown were my roommates as well. And then eventually I did my senior year live with John Carlson, the football player. But, living with a hockey goalie, living with regular students, that taught me about the world that I would be in after sport. And it prepared me in many, many ways to be successful.
It's increasingly unique, right, Ryan? I mean, more and more schools have off-campus housing units just for their student athletes. The student athletes, unfortunately, many of them are not even going to class, right? They take all their classes online. They have tutors, they have cooks, they have everything in there to try to do everything they can to win, to
Right.
win as many games, to have that little competitive edge in every dimension of their experience. And what they miss are those relationships of being with students from different backgrounds. Notre Dame is really fighting against the grain to kind of keep this the dormitory melting pot experience for all of our students. And as you said, not just to benefit the student athletes, but for you to benefit the other students as well. So again, let's go back to another anecdote. You have been a left tackle, so you are the blind side protector of the quarterback, an incredibly important and vital role on the football team. You were the left tackle for Brady Quinn, so kind of a renowned quarterback in Notre Dame history. Do you have any good Brady Quinn stories?
Oh, I got tons of them, and I love Brady Quinn to this day. Our team is so close. I think it's something too that people miss. Sometimes even in broadcasting, because Brady Quinn's a broadcaster now. They're like, "Do you know Brady Quinn?" I'm like, "Do I know him?" Yeah, of course. I'll give you two real quick. One, we were playing Michigan, and I tell them this every time we talk. And we had 97 Wolverine, which was a tackle eligible throw. I was going to get a pass and walk into the end zone. And so sure enough, we get down to the goal line, and Charlie Weiss, he told me he was going to call it in the game, and we did. And so, Brady Quinn rolls out to the right, towards where now the press box is, and looks to the left where the student section is, throws the ball, but he throws it down in the ground. It goes out of bounds. And I'll never forget, knowing it was incomplete, I looked at him and we both were smiling. And I remember that because we both believed we were going to win the game,
Yeah.
But I always tell him, I said, your worst pass ever was to a lineman, and you got to live with that, and that's something that, I still bring up because I would have ran in and scored. We ended up beating Michigan anyways, but I would have scored a touchdown right in front of, our student section. And that would have been, something that would have been a fun thing to see in the Observer, and just experience as a lineman jumping into the crowd, jumping into the students.
Right.
But then, also when I got into broadcasting, he was one of the first calls I made.
Yeah.
I said, "Brady, what do I need to know?" And it's funny because, there's when we know people, they assume there's a lot of conversation that doesn't need to be had, right? Show up on time, prepare. He goes, "Hey, don't wear a suit that distracts from what you're saying, not until you're well known." And I just thought that was so great to learn early, because you think, hey, I'm going to be on TV, I'm going to be doing this, I want to stand out. Well, you don't stand out with what you wear, you stand out with what you say, and the statistics and the perspective you bring with it. So, Brady's been a great friend. Love his wife Alicia too. We vacation down in Florida, and we see them probably once a year, and it's just so fun and we see each other at the Super Bowls every year in our different broadcasting capabilities. And it's just fun to have those belly laughs with people who know you so well.
So you go on, you play 70 games in the NFL, and very accomplished. You win Super Bowl 50. Can you tell us about what was the transition like going from your college experience in college football to the NFL? And you play for multiple teams over that period of time. From your perspective, how difficult is that transition?
I think it's difficult for all of us who graduate Notre Dame and transition into the regular world, right?
Yeah.
As an athlete, it was interesting to just have to, go grocery shopping instead of going to the food hall, North Dining Hall or something, and just so there's those little tactical things, right? But also, I remember coming into an NFL locker room, you got guys from all over the country now. You know, there are guys, some guys, I had some teammates who didn't know how to read. I had some teammates who, didn't, want to better themselves. I had spiritual teammates. I had, all kinds of walks of life. And so it was really unique to say, okay, I came from this world at Notre Dame where everyone wants to be successful and increase their success, increase their greatness. Well, here I'm in a place where some people want to be famous. Some people are selfish. Some people are honest about being selfish. Some
Mhm.
people are, are going to take me down a road I don't want to be on. So I
Right.
think for all of us who leave Notre Dame, to find yourself in a different situation with people from different backgrounds is unique. And the NFL definitely taught me that. And it also taught me, there are people who work to win on the margins. Winning with Peyton Manning is incredible, but it's not surprising when, I'd lift with him, and in between bench press reps, he's practicing fumbled snaps. The greats really work on their craft every single day.
Yeah.
And that's something I had to learn early. And that started for me learning how to make coffee every day. They said, "Hey, rookie, you're in charge of coffee." Well, I didn't know how to make coffee. Never had to make it at Notre Dame, right?
Mhm.
But it wasn't about making coffee. It was about doing something every day, no matter how I felt, to get better, to be a part of a team. And those are lessons that I learned pretty quick in the NFL. And those are lessons that between Notre Dame and my transition, I worked to win every day. And that's what helped me be a champion later on in my career.
So in 2015, you win the Super Bowl. You're the left tackle now for Peyton Manning, who is at the end of his career and a legendary figure on and off the field. Any anecdotes that you have about protecting Peyton and the relationship and what you learned from him?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's so much. Just an example of how prepared the greats are. We would have some of the veterans would lift 7 a.m. to get the lift kind of out of the way. Well, Peyton would sit in his car already in his workout gear, waiting for the last person to get into the weight room. So one, you didn't want to be that person, right? Because if you made Peyton Manning late for lifting, you were going to hear about it the rest of the day, right?
Yeah.
But also that preparedness, that hey, as talented as I am, as much as I don't have to follow the rules, here I am following the rules and I'm making sure you're sticking to them as well. I also
Yeah.
learned a lot about communication. One of our first games we played, he changed the play at the line of scrimmage. And, so a lot's happening in an NFL play. Hey, white 80, white 80 said, oh, hey, rocket, white 80, and white 80, timeout. Ryan, you got to pass on the play. I had forgotten to pass the play to one player to my left because I thought he had heard the play too. But to end that play as Peyton Manning, you're watching receivers, you're changing the play, to see that one person didn't pass down that chain of communication. That's how in tune he was.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will see Peyton and say, that's what you have to be as a leader. You have to be rigid. You have to be firm. But why Peyton was so successful is because he was so incredibly flexible at a moment's notice. That's
Mhm.
something that I really have learned. Flexibility is a skill. And the first play he came back after being injured, we had a run to the right or a pass play, and he checked it to a run to the left. And
Mhm.
so how many times in our businesses, in our professions, are we flexible to win? And that's the
Right.
only way you win, is by being flexible, by being prepared. And I learned a lot of that from playing with Peyton Manning.
That's fantastic. My understanding is your final year in the NFL, you're playing with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and somebody leaves a note in your locker. Can you tell us that anecdote?
Yeah, I'm probably the least talented player to play for the Steelers in Notre Dame history, right? And I learned that quickly because as I came to my locker after signing, and I don't know how this got there,
Yeah.
but Jerome Bettis and Rocky Blyer were on a poster, and it was in my locker, and it said, "Keep up the tradition, go Irish." And I just thought, here are two guys who won Super Bowls here,
Right.
and there's an expectation of what you are as a Notre Dame man and as a Notre Dame player. And it was quite the introduction, the most unique introduction that I've ever had to a locker room in the NFL, from some of the Notre Dame greats that just, basically said, hey, we're watching. And if you think you've done something yet, you better get on our level. And it really also opened my eyes up to how many people in the Pittsburgh area are huge Notre Dame fans, who have family that go to Notre Dame. So
Right.
it was just so cool to get that remembrance. I'm walking off of the Super Bowl, Lou. I'm feeling good. And
Yeah.
you walk past 6 Lombardi trophies in the Steelers office, and Notre Dame guys had a hand in every one of those.
That's
And
right.
to get that letter in my locker, keep up the tradition, go Irish, definitely set the bar.
Yeah, that's powerful. And it's also powerful that fraternity of Notre Dame players that went before you, that you had never played with, maybe in some cases hadn't even met, but they're passing on that love and that support and that mentoring to you from afar is a really great story. You finish up your football career, and you are an incredibly busy man, but you write this best-selling book, Mindset for Mastery: An NFL Champion's Guide to Reaching Your Greatness. What are some of the lessons that are embodied in that book?
Yeah, well, mindset is everything. And, it was one of the reasons why I was successful throughout my career. But choosing your mindset's a choice we make every day. And listen, winning the Super Bowl, everything you believe about yourself comes true for other people. When I wear this ring, Lou, people know I know how to win, I know how to be successful, that I am successful. But people didn't know that until we won the Super Bowl. I want people to have that moment in their life. You have to, I always tell people on my show, winning starts with belief. And so how do you believe in yourself? How do you overcome adversity? We talk about fear less than we talk about sex. And so to be able to say, hey, I had fear of achieving my dreams. The night before the Super Bowl, I was terrified that my greatest achievement would be my greatest failure. Okay, what do you do? Well, I use the words I am, I can, I will. And it started at Notre Dame. I was getting my tail kicked, Lou, in my first practices, and literally got knocked out of my cleat. And I had to say to myself, I am here because I can play, and I will be a great player for Notre Dame. I will win this one drill at practice. And sure enough, I did. And so I understood that my mindset was the only thing that separated me from my success. But then some other things happen. As you know, Lou, as a leader, when you're a leader, people are going to treat you differently. You wanting to be successful, you constantly reaching greatness, you trying to win on the margins, that's going to scare people who are comfortable. And so I encountered a lot of people in my life who are comfortable, who tried to knock me down simply because I wanted to be successful, and that made them feel a certain type of way.
Right.
So I wanted to, in my book, talk about that. Hey, listen, not everyone is worth your time. When we went to the Super Bowl after winning the AFC Championship, I had somebody I hadn't talked to for 4 years ask me to come to their kindergartner's class to get them ready for the Super Bowl and get them excited. That's not my job, And so you just have to realize that your mindset's a choice you make every day, and it's the difference between winning and losing. Also, you're going to be treated differently because you want to win. A lot of guys in the NFL get paid, and they're only 53 champions every year. It's because those guys are willing to do what it takes, and some guys aren't. And to be around that environment really was eye-opening, and I wanted to encourage people, go for your dreams, overcome, find out what you can do when you fail instead of what happened or whose fault it was, and in that way you will succeed.
So you've enticed us. Let's order the book on Amazon. Again, Ryan Harris, Mindset for Mastery: An NFL Champion's Guide to Reaching Your Greatness. So the transition that you make from a college and then professional football career to being a broadcaster, you were just selected as the Colorado Broadcaster of the Year. You have your own radio show, a daily radio show in Denver. You do all kinds of television, and you are the voice of Notre Dame football radio station. How do you? What's the secret to your success in going from one profession to another?
Well, at the Pittsburgh Steelers, every day they say the first rule in getting better is showing up. So I just showed up, Lou. I knew what I wanted to do, and I showed up. And I'm not afraid to fail because I'm willing to learn. And so, one, I got to read a lot, and it's a ton of reading. But I love Notre Dame, and the Notre Dame work I do is some of my favorite work because I know that every athlete at Notre Dame makes a choice to go beyond. And telling those stories, right? Just a couple of years ago, first round pick to the Chargers, also, went to Japan in the offseason and learned how to speak Japanese. Let's talk about that because that's unique, talking about the rivalry with, Navy, how it's the weirdest game in the world because you hear things like great tackle, let me help you up, things you'll never hear in another game. So, to be able to share those stories and travel to the cities without stress. I mean, Lou, we played USC a few years back, and I surfed for a couple hours before the game because, all my work was hay was in the barn, as Peyton Manning says. So I read a lot, I show up everywhere I can, and I'm willing to fail because I'm willing to learn. And in that way, I've really been able to humanize and educate people about the game they love in football and really tell some great tales and give some insight into what to really pay attention to when it comes to your favorite sport.
I want to offer my congratulations because I know the Denver Business Journal has just named 40 under 40 list for this booming metropolitan area, and you were named to that list. And it's not for your football prowess or even your great broadcasting abilities, but it's what you've done to give back to so many service organizations throughout that area. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, thank you again, Lou. And I think all of us at Notre Dame believe that we have to be a force for good in our communities. And every champion that I love and have watched, they went beyond themselves. So I knew that if I was going to be a real champion, I had to go beyond what was best for me and help what was best for my community. So, showing up and learning about what was important to the city, excuse me, what the city needs, and also where I can be efficient. And specifically around, financial literacy, that's a great door that I've found to talk about a lot of issues. We have a homeless crisis in our city, and talking with the mayor, he mentioned that 22 people cost the city $11 million due to incarceration, police calls, ambulance calls. So when you start breaking down those numbers, is there a more efficient way to handle our homeless population? If we continue to think short term, are we really solving a problem that's costing us money? And oh, by the way, costing us human lives that we care about deeply. Right. Showing up as a minority person who is a real estate investor and saying, hey, this part of the process is not good for us. Or right. Showing up and talking about, how an investment in education makes safer communities, teaching kids about investment makes, better choices and raises that opportunity cost of doing crime. So I want to be a part of our city, and it starts with me being a great husband and a great father. It takes me going beyond to help our community show up for people and really help raise money for things that we can make a difference in.
Fantastic, Ryan. I just have to say that I think, like everyone watching today, I just stand in humble amazement at the core goodness that is embodied within you, and the way that you live Notre Dame values in your everyday life, the way that you are a force for good for others, your integrity, your example, and your hunger to learn and grow every step of the way, your humility, which I think characterizes a good Notre Dame person as well, and maybe is different than a lot of other successful folks who can get trapped by arrogance and pride. So really, really grateful for your example. I want to make a couple quick announcements, but we always close these interviews with a Hail Mary. And I'm going to make a kind of a change here midway, and I'm going to ask you to close with in honor of Ramadan, an Arabic prayer, or a prayer that perhaps a part Arabic or in English that you could close our session with. But before we get to that, two things. Next week, please join us at noon Eastern Standard Time, where we're going to be joined by our provost, Mari Lynn Miranda, who will talk about closing out the semester so successfully this year of COVID, and what are the future academic aspirations for Notre Dame moving forward. I want to just mention, too, I talked about Commander Mike Hopkins and his crew landing. It's just been delayed because of weather. Their landing is not going to be until May 1st now at 11:36 a.m., so stay tuned for that. I also want to invite you to a Choral Fest, ACA Fest, next Thursday night at Notre Dame Stadium at 8 p.m. A cappella groups, student groups from across Notre Dame and St. Mary's will be performing live from the Notre Dame Stadium. So please plan to join us for that. So without further ado, thanks again, Ryan. And if you don't mind, if you would close us with a prayer in honor of Ramadan.
Thank you again, Lou. Thank you for your kind words. And I just consider myself one member of our family. So I'm happy to uphold the traditions that many before me have held and that many after us will continue to uphold. And I'll read Al-Fatiha, which is the opening chapter of the Quran. And it just simply says, all praise be to God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, master of the day of judgment. You alone do we worship, and from you alone do we seek help. Guide us on the straight path, the path of those who are righteous, not of those who have gone astray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Ryan. Take care. God bless. Good luck with all you're doing. I can't wait to meet Jamie and your kids. and go Irish.
Thanks for your time, Lou. Go Irish.
Thanks, Ryan. Bye bye.